Gay skinheads take part in a gay pride event in the United Kingdom in 1990, one of them displaying a large skinhead tattoo across his back. The image deliberately and ironically subverts the skinhead subculture's stereotypes, originally tied to the British working-class movement before being co-opted by far-right groups. Mark Hamill, the eternal Luke Skywalker of Star Wars, appears in 1989 with a thick and imposing beard that his fans rarely associate with the galactic character who made him famous. The photo captures the actor in full creative freedom with his appearance, far from the visual demands of Hollywood studios. An Irish woman poses barefoot in traditional dress in a rare 1913 autochrome Lumiere photograph taken in Ireland. The pioneering color technique of the time and the quiet dignity of the woman portrayed transform the image into an extraordinary ethnographic and artistic document of a rural culture in transition. A homeless man sleeps on the sidewalk of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1941, as Poland lived under Nazi occupation. The image captures the deliberate abandonment and misery to which the Nazis subjected the Jewish population confined to that space, an antechamber of the genocide that would soon become the Holocaust. The author shares with good humor photos of her mother and grandmother in Seoul in the 1960s, noting that unlike so many family photos circulating on Reddit, hers were not supermodels in their youth. The charming and authentic image captures two ordinary women, full of everyday grace and genuine character. Andre the Giant, the legendary 7'4" wrestler, still holds the record for the most beer consumed in a single sitting. In 1976, he drank 119 beers over 6 straight hours at a bar in rural Indiana without stopping. The feat was so widely known that it became a permanent and undisputed fixture of his personal legend. A hand-colored photograph from 1865 portrays a young Jewish girl in Damascus, Syria, dressed in vibrantly colored traditional attire. The rare and exuberant image, colored by hand, using a technique that predated color photography, reveals the cultural richness and pride of the Syrian Jewish community. A police photo of Zofia Posmish, taken after her arrest for distributing anti-Nazi pamphlets in occupied Poland. She was sent to Auschwitz and survived 2 Nazi concentration camps. After the war, she became a writer and author of the story that inspired the opera The Passenger about the Holocaust. The author shares a photo of her grandmother from 1908 as part of a Reddit trend of posting old family portraits. The image, likely a formal studio portrait, as was customary at the time, shows a woman with the pose and serious expression that characterized photography at the turn of the 20th century. The author appears with his date at the school Valentine's Day dance in 1969, the kind of photo that captures the anxiety, excitement, and innocence of the social rituals of an adolescent generation. The clothes, the hairstyles, and the framing of the shot visually pin down a very specific moment in American culture. A 1907 photograph records a British blacksmith removing the chains from the enslaved man's legs. The somber documentary image portrays the final years of the slave trade and the slow, painful process of emancipation happening not only in the Americas but also across African colonial territories. An Ethiopian Jewish man carries his elderly mother on his back as he enters Israel as part of Operation Solomon in 1991, the secret Israeli operation that airlifted more than 14,000 Ethiopian Jews in just 36 hours. The deeply moving image of a son carrying his mother is one of the human symbols of the Ethiopian Aliyah. British missionary Alice Seeley Harris documented around 1898 the brutal conditions of rubber plantation workers in the Belgian Congo under King Leopold II's regime. Her photographs, including this one of an adult worker, were used as evidence of colonial atrocities and helped change the course of Congo's history. A father shows off a surprising skill to his young daughter, who stares at him with wide eyes, full of wonder and pure delight, in Melbourne, Australia, around 1940. The spontaneous and warmly domestic portrait captures the magic of small fatherly talents that, from a child's perspective, feel entirely indistinguishable from real magic. Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, and Harrison Ford appear in 1979, reviewing the script for The Empire Strikes Back in an atmosphere of relaxed focus. The behind-the-scenes photo captures three young actors who had no idea they were forever bound to one of the most iconic franchises in cinema history. Otto Frank, Anne Frank's father and the only surviving member of the family, revisits in 1960 the hiding place in Amsterdam, where the Franks concealed themselves from the Nazis for more than 2 years before being discovered. The look on Otto's face as he contemplates that space carries decades of grief, survival, and memory. A series of photos of couples enjoying intimate moments together in 1959 captures the romantic aesthetic of the pre-sexual revolution era: formal dates, elegant clothing, and expressions that blend shyness with affection. The images offer a delightful window into the courtship rituals of a generation that dated with etiquette. The author's uncle appears in a photograph from the 1970s, recording the day his parents moved to a new home, or to another country. The image captures a young man in a moment of family transition, with the unmistakable visual aesthetic of the era: earthy tones, distinctive haircuts, and the lightness of that decade. The author's mother appears in the early 1990s, proudly displaying a shield she painted by hand. The combination of craftsmanship and strong personality from the young woman reveals a creative and independent spirit that the author clearly admires and warmly celebrates by sharing the image. In a tense and historic scene from Germany in 1945, a former prisoner of a Nazi concentration camp points directly at the guard he identifies as the most brutal in the camp. The photograph captures a moment of public accusation that predated the Nuremberg trials, justice beginning to take shape. A photo of Donald Trump with Miss Teen USA contestants around 1997 took on new significance after a 2005 recording surfaced of him boasting about having entered contestants' dressing rooms without permission. The image became one of the most frequently cited documents in the debate about Trump's abusive conduct. A photo of Shaquille O'Neal's high school basketball team in 1989 appears to show a perfectly normal group of teenage boys, until the eye notices one player who is visibly larger and more imposing than everyone else. Spotting Shaq in the photo is a visual exercise that makes it immediately obvious why he became an NBA legend. Two barefoot boys use their own bodies to climb the moving parts of electric looms at a cotton mill in Georgia, photographed by Lewis Hine around 1908. The image stands as one of the most powerful and enduring documents produced by the movement against industrial child labor in the United States. Two photographs of Abraham Lincoln, one from 1861 and one from 1865, placed side by side, reveal the physical devastation that 4 years of civil war wreaked on the president's face. The contrast between the relatively young man who took office and the visibly exhausted elder who would be assassinated days later is deeply unsettling. The author's grandmother appears in a 1958 photo with a caption that became one of Reddit's most popular jokes on old family photos: "The last time I drank rum." The expression on her face, whether joy, dizziness, or something indefinable, makes the caption work perfectly as a visual and nostalgic punchline. Marcy Borders, known as the Dust Lady, was photographed covered in ash and debris after escaping the North Tower of the World Trade Center alive on September 11, 2001. The image became one of the most iconic of that day. She died of stomach cancer in 2015 at 42, attributing the illness to the toxic dust she inhaled. During the foreclosure farm auctions of the Great Depression in Michigan in 1936, farmers organized penny auctions. They conspired to place ridiculously low bids so that the original owner could buy back his land. The image documents a form of collective resistance against financial speculation and institutional cruelty. A photo taken in California around 1961 shows young surfers posing with or near a swastika, a jarring collision between California's laid-back surf culture and some of history's darkest symbolism. The disturbing image raises questions about youth identity, alienation, and the seductive appeal of transgressive imagery. A Times Square scene from 1955 records the practice of public shaming that was common at the time. Someone, likely a debtor, a cheater, or a minor criminal, is displayed on a sign or notice board for public scrutiny. The medieval practice of collective humiliation survived with surprising normalcy well into the modern era. The last known photograph of Freddie Mercury, lead singer of Queen, was taken in 1991, just weeks before his death from AIDS complications in November of that year. His face, visibly ravaged by illness, contrasts with the irreducible flamboyance of an artist who never lost his presence until the very end. A Halloween photo from the late 1990s captures children dressed as South Park characters, the satirical animated show that had just premiered on American television in 1997. The improvised but recognizable costumes of Cartman, Kyle, Stan, and Kenny show how quickly the show became a cultural phenomenon. A rare pre-accident photograph of Marvin from 1994 shows a young man in apparently good health before an event that would change his life. The image was shared with affection by someone close to him, revealing a personal before and after story that resonates with anyone who has ever experienced a sudden turning point. The author's grandfather appears in a photo taken in the Philippines in 1942 during World War II. With the self-assured and unfazed posture she affectionately described as total badass energy. The image captures a young American soldier far from home, seemingly fearless in the middle of one of the Pacific's most brutal campaigns. A handwritten letter by Albert Einstein, dated April 1948, 1 month before the founding of Israel, discusses his complex positions on Zionism and Palestine. Einstein, a secular and internationalist Jew, had reservations about Jewish nationalism and expressed genuine concern for the rights of Palestinian Arabs. Fanny Virginia Cassiopeia Lawrence, just 5 years old, was photographed around 1863 as a so-called redeemed slave child, one rescued from slavery. Her extremely light complexion demonstrated that the so-called one-drop rule was a completely arbitrary racial construct, given that she had been enslaved despite her appearance. Russian troops dig in and wait for a German attack in a 1917 photograph during World War I, the same year the Bolshevik Revolution would sweep the Tsar from power and pull Russia out of the conflict. The photo captures exhausted soldiers fighting in a war that would consume the very regime that sent them to fight it. A 1847 photograph records what is considered the first war ever documented by cameras, the Mexican-American War. The images, crude and imprecise by today's standards, were revolutionary at the time. For the first time, the public could see not idealized battle paintings, but actual records of warfare. A 1969 photograph captures one of the great anti-Vietnam War demonstrations, when hundreds of thousands of Americans took to the streets across the country, demanding an end to the conflict. The image represents the moment when popular opposition to the war became too large for the Nixon administration to ignore. Arnold Schwarzenegger poses in September 1983 on the day he became an American citizen, years before becoming one of Hollywood's biggest stars and later governor of California. The confident smile of the bodybuilder, who had already conquered the world of sports, now reflected a new pride of national belonging. A 1901 photograph shows Aboriginal prisoners in chains in colonial Australia, a brutal image of the systematic policy of imprisonment and removal from Indigenous lands practiced by the Australian government. These colonial-era images reveal a machinery of terror that most history books describe only partially or not at all. Diego Maradona rolls up his sleeve to show Fidel Castro his tattoo of the Cuban leader's face during a meeting in Havana. The absurdly specific moment, one of football's greatest idols showing a dictator a tattoo dedicated to him, perfectly captures the mutual admiration between two of the 20th century's most outsized figures. The author's father appears in a 1972 photo at his uncle's bar mitzvah, holding a magazine with a mischievous grin while his parents and brother pose normally around him. The image captures the hilarious presence of someone who simply couldn't resist disrupting the family solemnity with an unforgettable act of quiet rebellion. A shocking 1948 photo shows Lucille Chalafou hiding her face in shame while her 4 young children sit beneath a sign reading, "For Children for Sale." Unemployed and desperate, she was pressured by her husband to place the notice. 3 of the children were purchased for $2 and taken away by strangers. The author appears in a 1987 wedding photo, attempting to discreetly steal a glass of wine while his mother, visible in the background with a camera, wasn't looking. The domestic and mischievous scene captures that universal childhood impulse to sneak something forbidden at a party while no one is watching. A rare ground-level photograph taken on June 5, 1989, shows, glimpsed between trees on the left, the tank man, the unknown protester who single-handedly blocked a column of tanks during the Tiananmen protests. This unprecedented angle on the most iconic image of modern resistance is extraordinary. The 1963 Chevrolet Corvette split window, with its distinctive divided rear window and aggressive lines, is considered one of the most iconic designs in American automotive history. The photo captures the car in its full chrome and sculptural glory, an object that was simultaneously a performance machine and a work of industrial art. Nancy Reagan sits comfortably on Mr. T's lap during a Christmas visit to the White House in December 1983. The actor and wrestler famous for his role in the A-Team had become one of the most recognizable faces in American pop culture, and the relaxed photo with the First Lady became one of the most surreal images of the Reagan era. The author's mother appears in a photo taken in 1980 when she was 24 years old, a young woman with all the aesthetic and energy of the turning decade. The photo was shared with warmth by her daughter, who sees in the image not only her young mother, but a living portrait of an era that shaped the generation that raised her. On November 4, 1940, during the German Blitz on London, a bride leaves her freshly bombed home to get married. Wrapped in a white veil amid the rubble, she walks toward the altar with a resolve that became a symbol of British resilience in the face of the nightly bombardments that were destroying the city. The author's parents appear in a 1987 photo when they were 16 and 17 years old at what looks like a school date or event. The caption reveals they are still together 34 years later, transforming the simple image of two teenagers into a portrait of lasting love that survived decades of change and challenge. Queen Marie of Romania is photographed in 1896 with impeccable posture and the resolute expression of a monarch. A granddaughter of Queen Victoria and considered one of Europe's most beautiful and politically astute women, she would play a crucial diplomatic role for Romania during and after World War I. A woman is arrested by police officers while peacefully protesting against racial segregation in the United States in the 1960s. The image captures the absurdity and violence of a system that criminalized the pursuit of equal rights. And the woman's gaze, calm and determined even in handcuffs, radiates an unforgettable, quiet strength. In 1948, a boy stops in front of an appliance store window and watches television for the very first time in his life. His face pressed to the glass, eyes wide open with fascination, the image captures the precise moment when TV entered the world and permanently changed how all of humanity would relate to images and stories. Greta Garbo, just 19 years old, sits hesitantly next to Leo, the MGM Lion mascot, in 1924. The Swedish actress who would become one of the greatest icons of silent cinema had barely arrived in Hollywood, and the visible unease on her face around the lion is both funny and endearingly humanizing of a legend. The author's grandparents appear in 1960 on a romantic date, a photo she describes as her favorite from the entire family collection. The image, likely taken by a third person, captures two young people in love, in a moment that would become the foundation of an entire family, long before they knew it. An X-ray of Adolf Hitler's skull, taken in September 1944 during medical evaluations conducted by his personal physicians in Germany. The clinical document of the Third Reich's leader takes on a strange and disturbing dimension by revealing the anatomy of a man whose decisions determined the deaths of tens of millions. Jackie Kennedy appears in a 1963 photo, pregnant and smoking a cigarette, with the casual ease that was completely normal at the time, before the massive medical warnings about the risks of smoking during pregnancy. The image looks scandalous by today's standards, but was entirely commonplace behavior among pregnant women in the 1960s. A soldier of the 369th Infantry Regiment, the famous all-black Harlem Hellfighters, poses in 1918 holding a puppy he rescued from the front line during World War I. The image's contrast between the overwhelming brutality of the war around him and the tenderness of this small, ordinary act of care is quietly devastating. A woman inspects with curiosity and some skepticism the seatbelt installed in her car around the 1950s, a piece of technology that was brand new and that many people actively resisted using. The image documents the moment when seatbelts were just beginning their long battle for public acceptance. The author's parents appear in a photo taken around May 1981, approximately 9 months before she was born. The photo was shared with humor and deep warmth as a portrait of two young, love-struck people completely unaware that they were about to become responsible for an entirely new life coming into the world. A U.S. Marine drags his wounded comrade out of a sniper's line of fire to safety during the Battle of Karma in Iraq on October 31st, 2006. The image of one soldier saving another under extreme danger captures with both brutality and humanity the physical and emotional weight of modern combat. John Kitts was photographed in 1870 at the age of 108, hailed as the last surviving soldier of the American Revolutionary War. If the claim is accurate, he would have fought for U.S. independence as a young man and lived long enough to see the country grow for more than a century after its founding. John Moore kisses her fiancé, Ralph Nepple, a gravely wounded World War II veteran, after he receives the Medal of Honor from President Harry Truman on August 23, 1945. The photo captures a moment of intense joy set against a backdrop of sacrifice, love, and recognition joined in a single historic kiss. The author's grandfather, a veterinarian, appears in a 1950s photo, inspecting one of the early machines that anticipated what would become the Internet, likely a teletype, a mainframe, or a large-scale computing system. The image brings together emerging science and family memory in an improbable way. A 1989 photo shows the author at 4 years old in a state of total ecstasy after his mother gave him a Ghostbusters toy. The expression of pure and completely uninhibited joy on the child's face as he holds his gift is the perfect definition of a kind of happiness that only exists in childhood and that adults spend their lives chasing. Xi Jinping, current president of China and General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, appears in a 1985 photo in San Francisco during an official visit to Muscatine County, Iowa, when he was still a local party official. The image of the future most powerful leader in China as a provincial bureaucrat is quietly revelatory. A young Jimmy Carter poses in his naval uniform alongside wife Rosalind in a photo taken before his political career began. They were married for 77 years until Rosalind's death in 2023, making theirs one of the longest marriages in the entire history of the American presidency, and a symbol of rare commitment and loyalty. Considered the world's oldest photograph, View from the Window at Le Gras was taken by Louis Daguerre in 1838 in Paris. The long exposure required made moving people and carriages invisible, except for one man who stood still long enough to be recorded, making him the first human being ever captured in a photograph. A man poses with his dog in a photograph from the 1920s, capturing a bond that crosses cultures and centuries, the friendship between humans and dogs. The simple and affectionate image gains an extra layer of tenderness when viewed 100 years later. Two beings whose descendants will almost certainly never meet. Jackie Kennedy, who had lost her husband to an assassin in 1963, offers condolences to Coretta Scott King at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral on April 9, 1968. 2 months later, Robert Kennedy would also be assassinated. The image unites two of the women most marked by American political violence in an embrace of solidarity. A Native American woman operates a telephone switchboard as an operator on June 26, 1925, a rare historical record that challenges the idea that indigenous people were disconnected from technological modernity in the early 20th century. The image documents the invisible participation of Native women in the American workforce. A 1966 photograph captures a man in a visually comic situation, the author described simply as, "Man experiences irony." Without further context, the enigmatic caption and the photo itself invite the viewer to construct their own reading of the irony in question, an unexpectedly entertaining visual and philosophical exercise. Arnold Schwarzenegger is sworn in as an American citizen in 1983, with the serious and solemn expression of someone who fully grasps the symbolic weight of the moment. The Austrian immigrant, who had conquered the Mr. Universe title and was about to become a global film star, was now making his belonging to his adopted country official. A New York City police officer crouches in the middle of the street in 1970 to play hide and seek with a group of neighborhood children. The relaxed and warm scene captures a moment of urban humanity that contrasts deeply with the racial and social tensions that defined Black and Latino communities in American cities at the time. The author's father took this photo in 1991, right after the author's first girlfriend punched her in the eye, immortalizing a black eye and a mixed expression of pain and embarrassment. The hilariously candid family photo documents an adolescent rite of passage that the father clearly found too memorable not to preserve forever. Misha al-Bint Fad al-Saud, a 19-year-old Saudi princess, was executed in a parking lot in Jeddah on July 15, 1977, accused of adultery on the orders of her uncle. Her boyfriend was also beheaded. The case gained international notoriety with the 1980 documentary Death of a Princess and sparked a diplomatic crisis. Albert Einstein, just 5 years old, is photographed in 1884 with the serious and thoughtful expression that would also mark his adult photographs. The future father of the theory of relativity and one of the greatest geniuses in human history appears here simply as a middle-class German child in the clothing of his era. A 1980s photo captures what the author affectionately describes as an 80s nerd, likely someone with oversized glasses, era-specific clothing, voluminous hair, and an expression that radiates total authenticity and complete indifference to the fashion trends of the period. The aesthetic is endearing and deeply nostalgic. Dolly Parton and Carl Dean, her future husband, appear together in a 1964 photo, before the explosive career that would transform Dolly into one of country and American music's greatest stars. They married in 1966 and remained together for more than 57 years, one of the most enduring relationships in all of showbiz. Freddie Mercury and David Bowie appear side by side backstage at the legendary 1985 Live Aid concert at Wembley Stadium in London. The two stars, who together recorded Under Pressure in 1981, share the same space as two of the greatest performers in rock history, a single frame containing two absolute legends. The author's father poses alongside rapper the Notorious B.I.G. around 1996, when the artist visited the family's clothing store in Detroit, Michigan. Months later, Biggie would be shot and killed in Los Angeles. The casual photo of a business encounter took on historic weight with the early death of one of hip-hop's greatest. A mother kisses her son for the last time before he leaves to join the Soviet resistance against the Nazi occupation during World War II. The farewell image, which for many would be the final embrace, captures in one gesture the invisible personal sacrifice that sustained the resistance of an entire nation. The author's grandmother, who reached 98 years of age, is remembered with a photo showing her in full nurse's uniform during World War II. The image of a young woman who dedicated herself to caring for wounded soldiers contrasts with the extraordinary longevity she would achieve in the decades that followed. Anne Frank, 11 years old, and her sister Margot appear relaxed at the beach in Zandvoort, the Netherlands, in 1940, just 1 year before the family went into hiding. The photo of the sisters happy in the sun is one of the most painful Anne Frank images, because it so cruelly contrasts with what was coming for both of them. Mildred and Richard Loving, the interracial couple who brought to the U.S. Supreme Court the case that struck down anti-miscegenation laws in 1967, appear with their children in front of their home in Virginia. The state that had criminalized their marriage. Their legal victory transformed American matrimonial law forever. The author's wife appears in a 1980 photo at the Kentucky Derby, the most famous horse racing event in the United States, held annually in Louisville. The image captures the distinctive aesthetic of that era at the Derby, Elaborate hats, summer clothes, and the unique atmosphere of one of America's most beloved sporting traditions. Captain Rosa Abdulkalek, at 26, appears in a 1990s photo as Yemen's first female pilot, a pioneering achievement in an extremely conservative country. The image of a young woman in the cockpit of an aircraft, in a cultural context that rarely allowed women into positions of such authority, is genuinely historic. A Black American demonstrator holds a sign or conducts a protest in Chicago in 1941, during a period of intense struggle for African Americans to participate fully in civic life, including the movement for equal employment opportunities in the defense industries that the New Deal had largely excluded them from. A photo of Kamala Harris from the 1980s shows the future Vice President of the United States as a young law student or activist, still decades before she would become a prosecutor, a senator, and the first woman, the first Black American, and the first person of South Asian descent to hold the vice presidency. The author's mother appears in a photo from around 1975 alongside her friend Nina, with all the distinctive aesthetic of the 1970s, colorful clothes, long hair, and the easygoing lightness of a generation that lived between counterculture and everyday normalcy. The image is an intimate and affectionate portrait of a young friendship. Gordon Isaacs, just 2 years old, appears beside the enormous 6 million volt linear accelerator that saved the only eye he had from retinoblastoma, making him the first pediatric patient to receive radiation therapy with a linear accelerator. The 1957 photo at Stanford Medical Center is a landmark in modern oncology. President Dwight Eisenhower enthusiastically bites into a hot dog, while Vice President Richard Nixon enjoys a cigarette during a baseball game in 1960. The casual and relaxed scene of two of the most powerful men in the world unwinding at a stadium perfectly captures the presidential aesthetic of a very different era. Participants in the 1916 Convention of Former Slaves pose for a group photograph, men and women who survived slavery and lived to see its official abolition in the United States. The serious and dignified faces of these individuals represent generations that endured the horror and reached freedom with history written into their bodies. Singer Eartha Kitt confronted President Lyndon B. Johnson at a White House luncheon on January 18, 1968, openly and publicly expressing her opposition to the Vietnam War in front of the press. The audacity cost her dearly. The CIA compiled a dossier on her, and she was effectively blacklisted from the United States for nearly a decade. The author's father appears in a 1978 photo with a look that she describes as Hyde, a reference to the character Stephen Hyde from that 70s show. The comparison highlights how accurately the TV show captured the real visual aesthetic of young people from that era. Dark glasses, long hair, and a permanently bored attitude. Belgian coal miners ride in silence inside a mine elevator after yet another exhausting shift deep below the surface in 1920. Their coal-blackened faces and hunched bodies reveal the harshness of a job that powered European industrialization at a human cost that rarely appeared in the economic statistics of the time. 2 Lockheed P-38. Lightning fighters, with their sleek twin tails, are transported disassembled through the streets of Liverpool, England in 1943 in a colorized image. The unusual scene of military aircraft being hauled between city buildings captures with visual strangeness the sheer industrial scale of the Second World War. 26 years ago, in the deep south of Louisiana, the author married the love of his life in a ceremony that may not have been legally recognized in the state, but was completely real in every way that mattered. The Post celebrates a same-sex marriage at a time when the law still excluded them from the right. An 1863 photograph shows Rebecca, Charlie, and Rosa, three children of seemingly white appearance born into slavery in New Orleans, Louisiana. The photos were used by abolitionists to shock the Northern public into recognizing the barbarity of slavery. Images of white-looking enslaved children provoked outrage in ways other photographs could not. One of the oldest men at the bar showed the author an old photo of himself behind the wheel of a 1981 Camaro Z88, the quintessential American muscle car. The image of a proud young man with his dream car became an unexpected gift at the end of the night, living proof that all of us were once young and in love with something.